We've got a special year-end episode for you, and we actually have another one that's going to come after this. And what we're going to do today on this Repertoire Report, my name is Justin Khanna, and I've got Ray DeLucci with me on the Repertoire Podcast. We're going to go over our takeaways from 2025. And Ray did a really good job of presenting some categories, some like macro areas and umbrellas that we're going to kind of bucket things under that we noticed across almost every single week, bringing you folks these episodes. And so just to set the scene right at the top here, we're going to talk about restaurants. We're going to talk about CPG. So the consumer products that you're maybe buying in e-commerce stuff, or you're seeing people promote, or you're getting ads fed across your feed, or you're even seeing some new stuff on the grocery store shelves. And then we're also, speaking of grocery, going to talk about grocery and the implications of just kind of the retail-driven demand side of food and buying food and preparing food at home, and sometimes even not so, and the threats that are coming there, as well as consumer trends and things that we kind of saw come to the forefront or maybe fizzle out in 2025. And so I'm really, really excited to get into this. We're going to kind of do our normal format of going back and forth with each other. Ray, do you have a preference on who should start here? Because I have a couple, we haven't seen each other's, and so I don't exactly know like how we can maybe be a little bit fair here, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, for listener enjoyment, I think, we're going to go over 2025, and there may be some conversation of maybe 2026, but it's in a backwards lens of like, if we're at the end of the year looking into 2026, like this is how we got here. And the next episode will be looking into 2026 all the way to the end, leading to 2027, what we see in restaurants in the broader food world. But if you want to start, I think the only thing I would ask Justin before we get into our stories is, I know a lot of our listenership is restaurant based. I kind of have like a sentence of how I feel restaurants were, how they were treated. My opinion is restaurants were beaten up in 2025. Do you maybe have the same sentiment, or do you have your own like phrase or sentence that you would consider about 2025 in restaurants?
My word was going to be tired.
Mm,
And I think that there's been a couple of like things at the end of this year, I think, going through some of the macroeconomic stuff with tariffs and just
mm,
consumers' reluctance to spend, combined with raised costs across all sorts of things, rents, ingredients. I just reading the headline today that Seattle's minimum wage in January is going to go up to $17.13, which is going to be the nation's highest minimum wage. And so that's certainly going to affect restaurants. And so all of like and even some stories that we covered last week for those that didn't hear. I brought it up gently, but I didn't exactly link the story. I think we'll maybe try to do a better job of linking the story below. Was basically this sentiment on almost like a pushback to unreasonable hospitality. And this idea that, what you see play out on TV or read in some of these books that, your favorite marketing director is getting inspiration from, maybe isn't that realistic to pull off every single night for every single restaurant. And we
mm.
talk about that on the show all the time. We use the word chef in a broad brush way. We use the word restaurant in a broad brush way. We use the word eating out and dining in a very broad brush way. But each of these individual businesses are incredibly different. And so tired was the one that kind of came to mind. I think I kind of maybe see yours a little bit more, where it's like there's just a bunch of different angles that, the beating up is coming from here. And so, yeah, I agree. Okay. So let me go first on restaurants. The one that I didn't necessarily see, but in hindsight, totally makes sense, is I wrote down drinking is down. And I think that I was going to talk about this in consumer trends, but the reason that I think it makes sense more to talk about in restaurants is because you and I, coming up in culinary school, a lot of what we were taught on the financial side is food costs are the way that they are. The way that you price your menu is the way that it is because in a broader ecosystem sense from the restaurant making money, drinks and especially cocktails and wine are marked up in a completely different way than food is. And so in the way that you're looking at a restaurant operate, we've seen some people respond in a really positive way. We talked about, I think it was Celine in LA talking about like mini cocktails on their menu. We've talked about infusing cocktail pairings or non-alcoholic options that are like genuinely exciting for people. But I know that there's also restaurant pushback there where it's like, if I'm going to be putting in the same amount of quote unquote work on a non-alcoholic cocktail, but I can't charge as much as one with booze in it, and somebody's not going to drink the same amount, it becomes this really, really interesting dilemma when you're looking at your revenue at the end of the quarter. And so all of this, in my opinion, has arisen from both the trend of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I don't even know if Gen Alpha can drink yet. That's maybe me showing my ignorance here, of just not deciding that there are going to be other ways to alter their state when they go out, seeing things like microdosing, seeing things like nicotine becoming more popular. And then also, I wear one on my person every single day, a health tracker, and those being so much more affordable, so much more accessible, so much more like in your face, from the sense of like every day when you wake up, you're trying to check your data and you just notice a pattern over and over again of how drinking affects your sleep more, from speaking personally, more often than not. It definitely leads to the decision when you're going out of like, maybe I'm going to abstain tonight. And I certainly
Hmm.
think that that has affected restaurants in a way that I certainly didn't see coming. And it's one of those things where like every single time you see a trend come and go, you kind of have to expect that it's going to resurface. Like even things like smoking cigarettes is actually in this weird place of like people are smoking actually a lot of cigarettes right now. And, going into like removing smoking sections from restaurants, you wouldn't have thought that like smoking would have a resurgence. But I think alcohol might go through this same, like boom and bust cycle. And so, I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity in future years, maybe not in 2026. I think this is going to continue, but one can only hope that like the gastronomic inclusion of alcohol as part of the table is going to just continue, or at least be a thing going forward.
Apparently, according to Nielsen, for total alcohol sales in 2025 is approximately 3% lower year over year than 2024. And then this is from them again. It's hard to track, but they're like estimated guessing about a 1% year over year decline in total on-premise alcohol sales. And then a 2025 Gallup poll found that only 54% of Americans report drinking alcohol, the lowest rate in nearly 90 years. And average drinks per week is at a record low, about 2.8 drinks per week. So, yeah,
I should also maybe tie in, we've talked about affordability maybe ad nauseum here on the show, but I can certainly see that inclusion as well, where we're thinking about not just the state that you leave the restaurant in, but then there's also like that sticker shock as we're seeing costs go up across the board. If you can do something to quote unquote lower your check at the end of the meal, and you're going to abstain from drinking because you don't want to have that, what is $17, $23 cocktail, it's going to make an impact there. And then we just see funny things like the story we covered with 11 Madison Park's first review coming out, where Chef Hume was talking to the critic of that piece and saying it's that K-shaped economy thing, where he's talking about $15,000 of bottles of wine being sold. And so maybe there's something there too, where it's like you're seeing, the higher end of things where it's like, let's pop the bottles, let's go for the, big, spenders situation here. But and you see that sometimes with reservation platforms, where they have the ability to tag individuals who have bought certain bottles, and that is now something that they're hyper aware of. It's like what gets measured gets managed situation here, where you're tracking how many dollars this person has spent on alcohol over the lifetime. You're maybe going to push more booze on them. It's just an interesting thing here, where again maybe it's not affecting every single person equally. What do you
Mhm.
got?
I had a interesting report from Bank of America. So they have a state of the restaurant industry in 2025, and the subtitle is "Restaurant Spending is Holding Strong, but Economic Uncertainty is Influencing How Often Consumers Dine Out and the Restaurants They Choose." So they go on to say that despite gusts of inflation, ongoing workforce issues, and the looming effects of tariffs, total consumer spending on restaurant fares continue to edge upward. I think this is important to know that like consumer spending is edging upward, but overall foot traffic is not. So when people are going, they're spending more money, which means either prices are higher or they're just you have more consumers like just spending more and adding more value, but traffic is lowering. And so they have what their start, and I think what I didn't realize, and I think the biggest story for 2025 for a segment of restaurants, if we were to say like fine dining, casual, QSR, is they lead with the QSR story of everything else. And they go on to say that, quote, the gap between price and value narrowed. So for some consumers, sitting down for burgers at a casual dining restaurant now feels like a better proposition than grabbing a fast food burger, particularly after portion size, dining experience, and perceptions of quality are factored in. And then due to inflation and labor costs, the prices at QSRs have risen to the point where casual dining is now viewed as a value because consumers are getting more quality food than they would with a QSR menu item. So they're saying that brands like Applebee's, Chili's, and Texas Roadhouse had a resurgence, while Kava and Dave's Hot Chicken, uh, you know, command like a premium and aren't doing as well. Chili's was a big winner. Overall, fast food restaurants raised prices 4% this year compared with the previous year, while casual dining restaurants increased prices 2 to 3%. And the narrowing price gap is basically putting pressure on QSRs to drive traffic by introducing new menu items and limited time offerings. So basically saying that when you're losing like, as a QSR and you're losing the price battle or the value to price battle that they've so often held, that they have to be more innovative. So again, for me, the biggest thing starting out was the failure of QSRs. And just, I mean, you've seen it. You're on YouTube or you're online on TikTok. The hate, the lack of value, the lack of consumers feeling like they're getting something beneficial or qualitative at a QSR is something that I did not expect going into 2025. You know, we kind of knew about the tariff plan from the administration. I mean, we knew about it. We didn't really know how it was going to roll out. We knew that it might be a tough year, but I think there was a lot of positivity looking at restaurants. And when you have prices going up on raw ingredients, when you have a consumer market that is just being crushed even more by inflation or by the lack of buying power, it was interesting to see that QSRs weren't able to adapt and ultimately were like taking the biggest hit. So for me, QSRs were one of the craziest 2025 failures that I don't think I saw coming.
So my second one is Michelin's expansion. Just like really, they hit the gas this year in 2025. And weirdly, 3 days ago, I don't know if you saw this, Ray, the Michelin Guide Southwest debuted. And so that is going to include Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah as part of the guide. And so the top left image in the press release is the Las Vegas Strip. And then you also have the beautiful like mountains of, some of these other states. And so that was something that a friend actually texted me, and he's like, it is insane to me that Utah is getting a guide before Seattle. And that is no shade on Salt Lake City or any of the chefs there. I just think that it is a testament to how Michelin has fundamentally changed how they're operating in a way that we haven't seen in the time that we've been in the industry. And that's a testament to like the leadership at Michelin. This is not me like applauding it from the sense of like, I think that everything they do is right, but I think that you cannot deny the fact that Michelin is going about things in a different way. I have not done the legwork to pull up the clip of me saying on back in the day when this was the Emulsion podcast that I believed that Michelin was going to take things in the direction of mirroring James Beard. And this is exactly what ended up playing out. And so I'm giving myself a little bit of a pat on the back. I think I was later, like it didn't happen as quickly as I thought it would. And to be honest, like it's still a little bit asymmetric in the sense that there are certain areas and geographical segments of the US that don't have the Michelin guide yet. But, we're breaking it here, at least for the first time us talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The Michelin guide is going to expand to 4 new states. And so that is just something that is, again, it's with every single time we see an expansion like this, I feel like it's almost like every single month we can talk about a new one. And so the pace here, talking about just new areas, more inspectors, and then new distinctions, talking about the grape story that we covered last week, just super fascinating. I maybe did not see it happening. Again, I saw it happening sooner, and then to see it all kind of like happen this year was just very, very interesting to me. And what I'm most excited for, we maybe not talking about exact predictions, is I'm very, very excited to see now that guides are in place, how does that change behavior? How does that influence concepts? How does that dictate where certain chefs decide where they're going to move and where they're going to open places? Are they going to expand? And just super curious to see that, previously you were thinking about, oh, maybe I'd open a place in California. And then if I want more stars again, I'll open in New York. That's the Thomas Keller case study. And now you have way more options. And so being able to see opportunity be given to more areas is obviously where I kind of lean. And so Michelin expanding is absolutely something that we've talked about almost to the point of being able to meme it. But I think it's like, it just doesn't stop, man. And so we just have to keep covering it.
Do you find it ironic that in a year where consumers are feeling the most stress financially, that in the same breath, Michelin is not only expanding but having a lot of success with expansion with the new grapes distinction, we're going to different regions. If we're dealing with a large subset of restaurant consumers that are seeing the value not there for a QSR. In the same year, Michelin, vanguard of fine dining is out expanding. Isn't it just such a like I think snapshot of the idea that like there is this like gap in spending or this gap like you've talked about the wealth gap between restaurant spenders where it's like there is this guide able to recommend restaurants for people that save up or people that have the funds to do that, but at the same time a restaurant like Chipotle is struggling because they're not offering value for their 18 or $12 slot bowl. So it's like all these things said, it's just an interesting dynamic. Your thoughts on like that irony?
Well, two places my head goes. One is the fact that like Michelin clearly sees the value prop here. And so they're saying, and I'm not the first person to share this idea. It's not that every single person in every single city that this comes to is going to go to eat at one of these restaurants in the same way that you might have like big market penetration and, access in something like a Chipotle going to a certain geographical area where they know that they're going to open, 11, 15, 25 locations when they enter a market. And or even like a smaller company like a Starbucks, smaller, like they're not doing food.
Mhm.
When I say smaller, like just a beverage company, opening in a certain geographic area. And then the other place where my head went was we have yet to see, that's why I talk about the opportunity thing here, is how is everything going to be dispersed once these cities hit what Michelin calls maturity as these guides are available. And so we don't know if any of these areas of the US is going to be the next hotbed of cuisine. Like, I sometimes think about Chicago from a sense of like being a business hub, being kind of like one of the bigger cities in the Midwest from a population perspective, but them being one of the heavy hitters in fine dining, I think it could have been another city, realistically. I think there could have been another quote unquote winner when it came to fine dining. Why was it Chicago? I think in a large testament, and that's why I think the Alinea story of this year was so shocking for us. It was kind of Grant and Charlie Trotter and like some of those other, heavy hitter chefs leading the way. But I'm interested to see, is there going to be a swath of new 3 Michelin star restaurants? If we take a snapshot of before Michelin did this expansion, and it was, New York, Chicago, California, and then maybe you can include Miami there. But even in Miami, it's like there aren't that many crazy, crazy fine dining experiences down there. And then maybe DC is the one that I would probably add in that mix. So you take that snapshot of those 5 cities being represented in the Michelin Guide, and then we fast forward, 3-4 years when the entire US is covered. What is the proportion there? Is there a
Mhm.
bunch more 1 Michelin star restaurants? And the number of 3 Michelin star restaurants are relatively the same. Maybe some places have closed, maybe some places have opened, but we have accepted as a country that we have kind of hit a critical mass, and the talent that wants to go to those places has already kind of like self-selected themselves to go to those places. Or do we see every single state now? We can like take a look in 3 years and say every single state that at least was covered in the big areas of the Michelin Guide. Maybe like New Hampshire doesn't have a 3 Michelin star restaurant. I feel like I'm going to get hate from anybody who's from one of these states. I'm not hating on New Hampshire, but it's like if 20 states that have 3 Michelin star restaurants in them, I don't know how that's going to pan out. And so that is going to be something that I'm kind of keeping my eyes on, is now that there's the opportunity to get recognized, it's like, how do the chips fall, so to speak? That's kind of where my head goes.
Real quick on that, I think this is a good point. It just so I was waiting to kind of insert it here, and I think that you've talked about the K-shaped economy. This is
Mm-hmm.
from Food Service Equipment and Supplies, so fesmag.com. And they say developing a clear outlook on the state of the food service industry represents a daunting task given the current economic and operating conditions. That's because the reality is it's a pretty mixed economic environment right now. There are 2 Americas, and the K-shaped economy has become the latest iteration of that. And they're saying that those economic indicators tend to benefit, these ones spending the branch households with annual incomes of more than $150,000. For those in that income range, things are looking pretty good. You see that reflected not just in restaurants, but in other parts of the economy as well. That branch of the K is what has kept the economy afloat. Then they go on to say there's a lot making a lot of people struggling to make ends meet. They have a couple of paragraphs here that I think are interesting. They go on to just talk about the economy in regards to the restaurant. They say the U.S. economy is in a period of slowing but positive growth, and it appears that will be the case for the next several years. So if we look at like the U.S. economy, obviously a lot has been done with the tariffs and with other policies and changing, but overall it's still growing in a positive way. That doesn't again mean that people's their financials are doing well, or that doesn't even mean that their income is better or that their buying power is better. It just means the economy is growing. The U.S. economy is growing. And so they go on to say that in 2024, U.S. gross domestic product grew at a rate of 2.8%. And for 2025, the conference board projects GDP growth will slow to 1.8%. And in 2026, will slow to more to 1.5. And then it will start climbing again at 1.8 in 2027. And the National Restaurant Association does their own projections, and they project the U.S. GDP will grow at a rate of roughly 2% in 2025 and 2026. And so what they say is that this plus tariffs is going to make this K-shaped economy, kind of grow even faster. And so all this is saying, and this is from Circana's David Portaladin. He says, in all of our modeling and forecasting work, the variable that stands out as being more different is consumer sentiment. Some of the underlying fundamentals of the economy are not that bad. Unemployment is relatively low. The difference is the uncertainty. You can't get on social media or watch a news program or talk to your neighbors without it being an overall negative environment. We're talking about global conflict. We're talking about government shutdowns. We're talking about divisive policy matters or national tragedies. It's always something that the consumer is feeling a little sour about. Consumer sentiment is one of those things that is holding the food industry back. And so, what they're going on to say is that the word value is the key industry buzzword that took over 2025, and it's going to be taking over 2026. They cite again Chili's ability to, you know, give their customers value. They look at costs and whatnot, but overall, I think what's really interesting is this idea that you have this dichotomy for a reason because it is a K-shaped economy, and that is totally hit restaurants. So just something to look forward, not look forward to, but to look at as we enter 2026. I know I'm next on this train of ideas, and we both have really been focused on loyalty. And you've talked a lot, not just with Repertoire, but in past on making those little extra moments and those little extra experience for customers, for guests. And you see this all the time. We saw this in the James Beard report in 2025. James Beard, for those that don't know, James Beard does a report every year with Deloitte. And one of their trends that they had cited for 2025 is that intentional engagement to deepen guest connection. And the goal was for what restaurants could do in 2025 was to reignite the spark of loyalty by creating stronger, more personalized connections with customers. And then they went on to say that they had a survey where 73% of respondents changed their marketing strategy to increase use of social media platforms. And so basically the idea about this was to create not only, a buy one get one deal, but a social media narrative, a narrative on value, a narrative on belonging. And I bring this back to the Bank of America thing, or the Bank of America article, where they say culture and innovation and focus on promotion can be powerful differentiators. They again cite Chili's, but they go on to say that an emphasis on hospitality both builds customer loyalty and creates a positive workplace culture, helping restaurants attract and retain high performing employees, further strengthening the brand experience. Quote, restaurants are a people business. Your assets walk out the door every day, and the way you interact with people makes a tremendous difference. People like to be acknowledged, to be treated well, and that becomes a virtuous cycle. The stores attract more traffic and make more money, so they can hire and retain better quality employees, which enables them to fuel that culture and feed sales, which then makes it possible to pay their employees more. And they go on to show that in 2024, loyalty programs like surged traffic. So loyalty sales surged nearly 34% in 2024. And they're saying that they're waiting for 2025, but they're going to think that it goes up. So you said this on one of the last podcasts. I think maybe not that we missed it, but I still think restaurants don't fully give themselves the ability they need to give loyalty options for customers. And I truly think a lot of restaurants are missing that in 2025, and it's something in my 2026 list I'm going to look to.
I was thinking about this aphorism that kind of gets proliferated in Silicon Valley when they're talking about those first early users of your product. And the advice that so many people have given, I'm not going to be the first one to talk about this, is do things that don't scale the unscalable. And I think that that is what you're kind of seeing with this loyalty problem, where depending on the staff at the restaurant, if, a bunch of that person's homies are coming in to eat all the time, there's almost like this inbuilt loyalty to that person being there. I certainly have friends of mine who are, chefs at restaurants here in Seattle where I am way more like, I'm actually a week or so, I'm going to another, my wife and I have a date night planned and we're going to go back to a friend's place. And that is because we have this loyalty there that they're not tracking in an app. It's not going to show up on a dashboard anywhere. We text to set up the table reservation. And so that is just a situation where it is this more hand-to-hand combat. You have to sit at the table. How do you operationalize this? How do we, in this age of AI, get to a place where loyalty is something that people can actually, again, scale? And then I run into this brick wall of like the second you do something like that, the second it feels like a punch card, the second it feels like, I have to download an app, everybody rolls their eyes and says, I don't want to do that. This feels not real. It doesn't feel human. Or staff leaves because, XYZ chef got an opportunity elsewhere or wants a lifestyle change or insert reason. I just think it's this funny issue that you and I have noticed so much upside and benefit to something like loyalty, but it is this thing that is incredibly difficult to do in practice. And at least depending on the organization, if you're going to have it live with certain individuals, that becomes really, really hard. Because if you're going to have somebody come in and they're expecting XYZ SOM or front of house person to take care of them, and that person has a day off, because again, we don't want everybody to be like constantly on 7 days a week, every single night. You can't take a vacation. Like it creates this really interesting dilemma. And so all of that, I think, is something we're going to keep an eye on going forward. All right, I'm next. I had this thing that, again, can technically maybe go into consumer trends, but I don't even have a name for this yet. I'm calling this the loss of trust in the influencer. And it is like this almost vibe that I'm noticing on social media in a way that, similar to your point on people dunking on QSRs, it is this funny thing where you can go and bash Chipotle with your bowl in your car, talking about the fact that the protein quantities aren't what they used to be and the prices have risen astronomically. And I don't necessarily feel like Chipotle is worth going to anymore, quote unquote, because that feels like you're sticking it to the man and look at their stock price go down. And, like all of these things where it's a multi-billion-dollar company and you as a quote unquote person online spouting your opinion in a short form video, it's like maybe that takes traction. And then even if it does, these places that have this immense resource chest have the ability to rally the troops, at least the good operators do this, and then they make it so that every single portion is almost like a little over and above going into the next quarter, because it is something that we as a company are hyper conscious of, and that's something that we're really going to prioritize because we have seen this humdrum on social media, and we're going to make sure that we pay attention to this. That countered with what we're seeing with influencers going to individual single location restaurants. And I'm using that as maybe the other end of the spectrum. There's different places in between where you can land here. But it's almost like even if it's a restaurant group in an area that might have like 4 locations and an influencer goes and because, and again, I'm really painting with a broad brush here to try to make this exaggerated. I'm not trying to dunk on anyone individually here. But it's like if it is somebody who has a marketing job on the side and they've decided that they want to be an influencer with food, and then they know that they can get clicks on their account because they're going to get a bunch of followers from drumming up some drama around, I had a really bad experience at this hot restaurant in town. All of a sudden, I think us as a culture realize that, holy shit, like you are doing genuine harm to these small businesses. When you go and you're going to bash the quality of service or the, insert thing, I'm not trying to say that influencers should not be critical, but I'm more saying this like truly malicious, selfish behavior that we're seeing where you are actually not informed on being able to give the criticism to this place and you are doing it to better yourself. I think that has totally shifted and people are saying, is there actually some substance to the criticism here? Or is this influencer really just trying to do this to chase clout? And if that is happening, it is like, that has become almost like a total no-no on social media now, in my opinion, at least from what I'm seeing, in a way that I don't think it was previously. And I think you see this with like a bunch of food influencers having the same tone in the way that they're doing voiceovers for their videos. I think you're seeing the lack of value that some of these influencers are providing when literally they're just showing the food and sometimes getting ingredients wrong or, you know what I mean? Like they don't actually understand the story or what the chef was trying to do at the place. And so they just totally mischaracterize the business. I just think that there is like, we have reached the peak of seeing influencers, at least from this iteration of like short form video, trying to kind of like stir up drama. I think I'm hoping, at least in 2026, that we see just kind of like a reset to a reasonable baseline where, again, I'll shout out a creator here named Zoe in Seattle. She is a transplant from New York, and she has just been incredibly engaged and involved with the restaurant community here in Seattle. And she is doing it, in my opinion, like the right way. I have another friend, he runs an account called Find Me in Seattle. He's a dear friend named Connor. And he also just like highlights local businesses in a way that he's trying to support them. He's not trying to, like bring them down or degrade what they're doing. He's trying to showcase them in the best light possible so that it benefits their business overall, so that there can be more success, rising tide lifting all the boats situation here. And so all of that has been something that, like, as somebody who has not put out a going out to eat piece of content in a long time because of how my lifestyle has been changing, it's kind of like, it's something I'm just hyper conscious of, because I think there was this like influencers are a real threat to food critics, then they can be, like an amazing boon to success for some of these companies. If you're seeing a place get a bunch of views and a lot of hype and all of a sudden you're seeing lines out the door, And then I think this is like the dark underbelly that unfortunately causes a lot of harm. And I'm thankful that the culture has started to see it. And now I'm starting to see people literally say, like, please don't do this. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to have a bad experience at a restaurant, especially as someone with a platform online, talk to the staff. Bring your criticism to the individuals who are taking care of you. Give them an opportunity to make things right. Don't just go straight to social media and try to flame them in an effort to kind of like increase your standing on the internet in the hope that everybody will kind of like do the rallying thing around, like, oh, I can't believe they did this to you, because it's not going to happen in the same way that it does when you try to take down Chipotle or Starbucks.
This
Your
isn't like
thoughts?
a holier than thou moment, but like if you remember during the pandemic when we were allowed to go back to restaurants, I did a little mini series where I went to a couple of local restaurants when I lived in Maryland. I went to a Polish deli, I went to an Indian restaurant, and like I wanted to go and showcase the restaurant, but not in a way that was like negative, but to actually like show their story. And like a lot of these influencers would probably be welcome into kitchens. Like I was welcome into their kitchen. I was shown all their processes. It's just like there's so many ways to make content around restaurants that doesn't have to be bashing or negative. And we shared the story about, maybe a month ago now, or a few weeks ago, the Dine and Dash influencer not paying the restaurant, getting arrested, getting these free meals. I think there's a couple things in my opinion. I think the first thing is, everyone's chronically online, and maybe not chronically online, but I just equate it to it like the younger generation now has social media, right? Where we had social media kind of came, they were born into it. I feel like there's a point where it's just like, yeah, like if everyone's so used to being online, like it's just not cool to talk about it anymore. Like it's just like not a thing that anyone really cares a lot about. Um, and you see this with, and there's just like it's just like the difference between like someone who does it well and someone who just does it to get click views. Like there's almost like a loss of expertise, or there was a loss of expertise, and now there's like a clamoring back for it. Like when you do a this place called, you spend months at a time editing that, putting it together, giving valid criticism, and I believe you said this where it's like if there's any criticism, it's positioned in a way that is, effective, meant in a positive light, and is meant only as a direct feedback to the chef if he or she chooses to use it. And so it's just
Totally.
like,
Just a really
mhm,
quick add on to that, I will never tell anybody what to cook. I
mhm,
will tell somebody, like what was maybe off of what I experienced, but it's never a situation where I'm going to say I would have done it XYZ way. And I have received some pushback there saying like, well, Justin, if you do have thoughts, like you should share those. I just haven't really found a way to thread that needle yet where I
mhm,
don't, if I provide thoughts there, it's not their food anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm talking specifically in the context of like tasting menu restaurants where the dishes are maybe not tied to a specific type of cuisine. I'm never going to tell anybody to like make your biryani a little bit different
yeah.
because, like your grandma's wrong. I'm never going to tell anybody that. But it is like if you're thinking about doing a dish of like mussels and smoked tomatoes and whatever, I'm going to say something if like there's not enough acid in the dish. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like there's something there that I think is maybe just off. Or again, people heard me pontificate on my criticisms of Alinea in that episode too. And so,
Yeah.
all of that. I just wanted to say that.
And also, it's just think it's like that's such a different setting from like what some of these influencers do, where it's maybe a local sandwich shop, or it's a place that's like really thin margins and relies on the locality. And if someone with a high profile comes in, like that really does affect them, and it really does hurt that restaurant. Um,
Well, just really quick here, it doesn't even have to be someone with a high profile. I think
mhm.
that's the other thing
No,
we're seeing
yeah,
with the way that social media has changed because it's not a social media, it's interest media. You've heard that be talked about from other people who are more in the social media space than Ray and I are. But it's this problem where it's like you can be an account with 500 followers and your video can get 3.2 million views because you decided that you were going to bash the local sandwich shop. And I think that's one of the problems is that uh, again, it's like just because the algorithm decides to run with it because it is the rubbernecking watch the car crash effect where somebody's saying, "Oh my god, there's so many views on this video about this restaurant that I drive by every day. I have to see what's going on here." And it might not it might just be for totally the wrong reasons. And that's why I kind of get upset. And again, I'm excited to see this kind of shift and change.
yeah. I
That's all I had on restaurants.
I just want to recap. We the influencer is kind of out. QSR failing. Costs are really aggressively up for a variety of reasons. Same store traffic down year over year. Costs sales up for many, but business overall is really tough right now. There's some wage stagnation for some line cooks. There was it's starting to like settle out now where costs on labor were like super high in the early 2020s and it's been settling out. And obviously, if that's settling out for operators, that means line cooks are their wages might be stagnating a little bit. So all that to say, so that's kind of the recap on restaurants. I wanted to end restaurants though with maybe just like a brighter tone. Is one thing I didn't see coming that I thoroughly enjoyed was on Reddit. Chives took over in 2025. The act of cutting chives. Have you seen this on Reddit?
Hell
On
yeah.
Line Cook Reddit?
Yes. So, Rate My Chives and I, we have a Instagram DM relationship. We message each other back every so often. I did bring his page up in the breakdown of the bear that I did when there was
Mhm.
like chives being cut in, I think it was the omelets episode.
Yeah.
And I think that that was something that, like he saw that clip and we just had a very cool, conversation. I have like a whole series in mind that I want to do of like either taking somebody else and taking them from like wherever they're at and getting them up to a 10 out of 10 on Rate My Chives, or like, putting myself back in the arena, so to speak, and like seeing if I can hit a
Gosh.
10 out of 10 on Rate My Chives. Because it is just it's a really fascinating niche industry. Like I used to just full transparency. I used to cut chives and shallots and parsley every single day for the line at the French Laundry. Like that was my job, and it was something that you would get chives thrown back at you when there was too big of pieces, when you were cutting on too much of a bias, if you didn't give enough quantity, if they were too wet. And so like all of these qualities that he is looking for in chives, I know so intimately because it was my day to day. And just to see how I can look at a photo and see that he gave it a 7 out of 10 or a 9.1 or exactly all of these like little things, it is something that people want to strive for. And it is cool to see how he is quantifying one level of cooking professionally. And that's how I think about so many things in the context of the lessons I put out in Repertoire. Like Total Station Domination has 9 measures that you can test yourself on when you give yourself your station score. We'll link it in the description if anybody wants to get that. But it is something that like I think about this stuff in the really nerdy capacity because I think it's fascinating. And I think it gives you the fertile ground to ultimately change your behavior to get better and improve your skill set at work, that I'm just so stoked to like see something like this. That again, most people would like, if you haven't worked in fine dining, you're going to roll your eyes. If you cut your chives in a really quick flurry and you just kind of sprinkle it on in a last ditch effort to make something exciting, go for it. But I think there's certain environments where chives really, really matter. And so I'm totally with you, Ray. Seeing chives get popular again is awesome.
I staged at Terra, 2 Michelin star restaurant in New York City, my second month of culinary school. I had hotel and Wendy's experience. I wasn't very good at knife cuts yet, and I for some reason thought I had the genius idea of going to stage at a 2 Michelin star restaurant, and they had me cut chives, and it was so bad that they said you are no longer allowed to cut chives in this restaurant, and they just like
Damn.
stopped my cuts, and they said maybe we can use this for family meal, maybe, and like I just remember that. So my chives journey has been a hard one.
There's so many things like this, like your first quenelle, your first like plate up with a squeeze bottle, like so many,
Oh,
your first time carving protein, like any of these moments are like crucibles for improving your technique and your
well,
skill and your knife skills.
back to CIA was like my first. It was my second time making hollandaise, and our chef, I had Chef Cerrone. He was so adamant about keeping your dishes hot when serving food, and so just like muscle memory kicking in. Of like I put my ramekin into the oven to get hot. Obviously, if you pour hollandaise into a hot ramekin, it breaks. So I made this beautiful. I will to this day say the most perfect hollandaise I've ever made, and I put it into this damn ramekin, and it just split, and I failed. So it was
Oof,
great,
oof.
great
All
times.
right. We're moving on to CPG. I actually only have one for CPG and one for grocery. And so I
Okay.
don't know how many you have, but maybe I'll go first and then, you can maybe do some quick hits for CPG.
Hmm.
So the thing that I noticed, and again, I don't work in CPG that closely. I've done some projects on CPG stuff and I pay attention to it because sometimes it influences what consumers are either asking for or their behavior or, like even just brand building, I think is really fascinating to watch in CPG. But the thing that kind of came to mind here is I follow some of the accounts that are talking about this stuff is this idea of like when there's a trend, you can often bet on the counter trend to come soon after. And so what we more often see this in is something like politics. If something is going to lean particularly conservative, you can kind of expect that there's going to be a more liberal leaning perspective on that view that is like either going to immediately counterpunch that, or if it hasn't risen yet, you can kind of expect it's going to be coming down the pike kind of soon. And so this is like, but when we're talking about CPG, it bleeds into brands. And so as I brought up a couple examples. So one is like fonts that brands will use. So you have seen the grayification, everything is super minimal and everything is sans serif font. and it looks exactly like, if you've ever seen those images of like everybody's brand logo looks the same. All of a sudden in 2025, we're starting to see like more fun fonts that are serif fonts that have the little like curly cues on the side of the letters becoming more popular. Same thing with colors. You might see something being like very brutalist and minimal and gray and black and white. And then all of a sudden now you're seeing bright and poppy colors becoming something that is, and then that swings too far and everything looks like a, like pastel Pantone, like swatch on the shelf. And now all of a sudden you're going to see a company that's going to go like, we're going to be a bright gold package that's going to stand out amongst the sea of bright poppy colors. The other one is value prop. And so like you can have two ends of the spectrum. If a bunch of products are coming out that are talking about health, then all of a sudden you can start to see the swing back the other way on indulgence being something that people are really going to prioritize. Same thing with protein quantity versus deliciousness. And so that's something that like brands have to kind of play with, right? Because if you do 100% pure protein, it's like that is going to be incredible looking macros on the package, but nobody's going to want to eat that, at least in a broad base of, like trying to get consumers to care about this thing. And so anytime you see a trend, I think you can often, the last one was audience segmentation. And so if you see a product that is coming out that is particularly marketed towards like a male audience, you can now all of a sudden expect, maybe if that product has legs, females are going to start to want that too. Where is the quote unquote female version of this that I can maybe expect in the market? Same thing with like chic and polished and, very high end and posh. And now all of a sudden there's going to be a grungier, more homey, Western, you know what I mean? Like kind of a paint splatters, kind of version of this that's going to countervail or almost balance this out if there's a large enough TAM, total addressable market, for whatever this thing happens to be in CPG. And so that you can expect, if there's insert brand for health, maybe there's going to be an insert brand that has the same benefit, but it's going to be a little bit more on the indulgent side. That was just something I noticed. Because you can spin up brands so quickly, because the tools are so good, because the infrastructure is there to launch a brand, and because you have the ability with seeing what consumers are asking for on social media to see some of the people talking on podcasts, all of these things that are driving consumer behavior, you can see some of these things get spun up more quickly than it would stereotypically take a larger like craft, to come up with a brand like this. So that's just something I noticed.
Yeah, I think for me, there is so much room right now because within what you've just said is there is the ability for a brand to have more ability to be niche, right? To speak to a certain consumer. The
Totally.
K-shaped economy, the different segments of each part of that. So I agree. I think I saw that in CBG as well, and like there's no one right way of not only doing things but portraying your product to customers, and I think that's like a really good and a great observation.
What do you got? CPG.
All right, CPG. Well, first off, I would say that the biggest thing was GLP-1. This is something that continues to be rising. It is something that continues to be growing. GLP-1s, I covered it on a podcast for it's like something like 30%, 35%. I'll have to correct myself if I'm wrong in the notes of expected like food purchasing is going to be that's going to be the percentage by 2030. GLP-1's continuing to rise, but on top of that, what I've seen is just this idea of not only like this new type of consumer, but what food trade news called restaurant refugees reshaped the grocery store. And I think this ties, and I know we're going to get into grocery, but this kind of ties both together. When they say restaurant prices kept climbing, remote work remained the norm, and eating habits shifted dramatically throughout 2025. When you look at GLP-1s, when you look at the ability to purchase. And so the frozen aisle and meal kits exploded with genuinely good options, and the quality gap between restaurant food and retail offerings narrowed considerably. CPG brands that understood this, like Amy's Kitchen, Kevin's, Rayo's, and Saffron Road, to name just a few, invested in products that taste great and don't require much effort, and they grab significant market share from restaurants that price themselves out of regular occasions. And so, the biggest thing I saw was that CPG products stepped up their game. They went after different brand collabs that maybe you would have never seen before. You saw food development processes come out and really stellar products for people. I mean, there's a brand that my girlfriend and I eat all the time. I think it's called Feel Good Foods. She has celiac. It's this line of gluten-free items, and they've just exploded on what they have on offer. Pot stickers, jalapeno sticks, mozzarella sticks. It's almost to the point now where it's not even like we're not going to go out to a restaurant for if she's craving this because we can just get it at home. It's we can't get it at restaurants. Where can we go get a platter with gluten-free jalapeno poppers, gluten-free mozzarella sticks, gluten-free buffalo breaded wings? Where can we go and get that? You can't. So it's like CPG development, in my opinion, took a big leap to this like near restaurant quality, or at least the value perception, because they're offering solutions that a restaurant can't simply offer for especially people with a dietary restriction and allergen. And so for me, the biggest thing with CPG was this ability to adapt and lean into the idea that our food is high quality, like restaurant adjacent food, and not just something that's going to be picked up in the grocery store. And I think you're going to continue to see that evolution going to 2026.
I want to kind of dovetail off of it and kind of keep it in like grocery and CPG, like you said, are kind of like similar. I'll go
Hmm.
into my grocery one really quick, and then maybe we can go back to a couple of your CPG and grocery ones.
Hmm.
But similar to what you're kind of talking about, I wrote down for grocery that they have a bigger threat either coming or that they're currently experiencing to their margins than I would have expected. I know that we talked about restaurants being beaten up and tired, and we certainly know just from you folks messaging us or seeing the data that we're covering here on the show that restaurants are feeling the pain. But from what I'm seeing and what we're covering and what's coming being built, I think the headwinds are not in groceries' favor, in my personal opinion. And so I have a couple data points to back this up. So the first one is that Whole Foods is less strong, quote unquote, of a brand than it ever has been before. We've talked about the brands that they currently host in the store. We're talking about their kind of like perplexing situation with Amazon Fresh and how they're kind of like how Amazon is trying to get grocery figured out. And they acquired Whole Foods. Whole Foods was like a bastion of being able to go to shop and get these, small independent, doesn't include certain ingredients, has health conscious options available for people. And now I think that there's the meme that goes around that like you can buy Honey Nut Cheerios at Whole Foods, and that is just something that people did not expect. I'm not bashing Honey Nut Cheerios in any way. I just think that it's an interesting Whole Foods used to be crunchy granola, and now they're maybe a little bit more quote unquote mainstream because they have to be able to integrate with Amazon's larger customer base. And then I'm also looking at examples like Erewhon, which is again this that's what I thought Whole Foods was going to maybe not replace Whole Foods, but like for that shopper who, like the meme that would go around when Whole Foods was at the height was like your bill at Whole Foods is like astronomically higher than at your normal grocery store. And then Erewhon is coming out with smoothies that are what, like $30,
Dude, when
$40
I went to
for a smoothie.
Erewhon when I was visiting my buddy in California in Malibu, I'm not here to hate on a lot of things. That place was so overpriced. You want to talk about going in and having your dollar not mean anything? That place was insane. There was a $50 bottle of water. Like, I'm
Wow.
sorry. That's like I don't want them to fail. I don't. It's like why are you selling stuff this expensive? A damn smoothie. I think I left there. I spent $12 on like this small like roll of sushi or whatever, and it was just like it was the hand roll. Like, it was like a hand roll of like
Yes.
avocado. It was like $12 or $15. I was like, this is absolutely insane. But anyway, that's my
That's
rant.
nuts. Well, no, but Whole Foods has large US market penetration. And Erewhon, aside from like maybe doing some things in New York, has really not expanded in the same way across, outside of California. And so again, that is something where like, is there a market for, like that type of grocery store? Maybe, maybe not. You can see it in these smaller markets, but until they really show that they can have the ability to expand, it's like that's a headwind. The other one that we've covered on the show is automation and rapid delivery infrastructure. It's going to save time for consumers and offer quality that you kind of mentioned that is going to make growing to the grocery store in person yourself, it's going to be a really hard sell. If your city happens to have the tunnel infrastructure where we're talking about those robots that are kind of like zipping around these tunnels with really, really rapid response times and delivery timelines, as well as inventory availability, and then we're talking about drone delivery being a thing. We're talking about autonomous vehicles. We're talking about humanoid robots. All of this stuff is, in my opinion, an incredible headwind to grocery that is going to make them not make them go away. But notice what I said: the margins are it's even harder. And then the last data point here is what Ray has been really good at covering here, which is these unpredictable price swings in certain products. We've talked about beef a lot. We've talked about matcha. We've talked about all of these things that make it incredibly hard for these stores to operate, I can imagine. When, all of a sudden out of nowhere, the administration, slaps a tariff on a certain product. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, what about the inventory that I have? What about my upcoming orders? Like, how are consumers going to respond to this? And that just makes it incredibly difficult to run one of these types of businesses. And again, I'm hopeful that we can see something like what Travis Kalanick talks about, where the ability to eat healthy is available for quote unquote everyone, is how he talks about it, because that's, how he needs to talk about it for his company. But I think like larger proliferation on some of this stuff and making it so that you don't have to spend as much time and resources and money to eat in a way that you want to be eating. Like, who doesn't want that? You know what I mean? You and I, Ray, who like to cook at home a lot, like maybe we're going to push back on that a little bit. But I think that there is something there where it's like, for the vast majority of people, I think all of these things kind of like make for a perfect storm, so to speak, on grocery being in a little bit of a precarious situation going into 2026.
I'll cinch up the CPG grocery section with this last bit. The biggest thing for me, looking at a CPG grocery perspective, we talked about these brands doing really well, but U.S. private label like really, really soared in 2025. I think that, and this has been reported as well, and this is coming from Supermarket Perimeter, U.S. private label sales to reach a $280 billion record by the end of 2025. So this is the biggest year for private label sales. And what we mean by that is, if you go to an Aldi, they have their private label Cheez-Its and their private label, burritos or whatever. If you go into a Trader Joe's, they have their private label. There was that big lawsuit about the Uncrustables. Like, private label has always been seen as like kind of second tier. Like, oh, that's the Aldi version, or that's the Trader Joe version. But it's flipped. Trader Joe's, I would like to think, let it kind of some of this, and then Aldi has enhanced their product and private label. But there's been this investment from grocery stores to really enhance their private label offerings. And now we're at a point, Good and Gather with Target. Like, we're at a point now where private label is just taking up so much of a dollar spend. It is it's being taken seriously by consumers, and it's often being, chosen by consumers. And it's created a lot of competition in the CPG space. So my biggest takeaway for 2025, aside from the restaurant like adjacent quality food, is this idea that private label has really blown up, and it's been a huge value add and positivity for the consumer, and it's been a huge value add to these grocers and these restaurant or these grocery stores. So for me, I just think it's really cool to see your thoughts on private label booming in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you have the ability to control, like elements of the supply chain, of the quality of things, on just prices in general, you can make more margin. I mean, like Amazon was one of the big proponents of this early on with non-food things. Like, they have literally all the data on being able to see like what products are selling the most, what margins people are making, how frequently things are being returned. And so if you have all this data, why would you not act on it? Why would you not pour some resources into taking things that are selling really well, have reasonable margins, and that that if you stock it, it's going to sell? You have the ability to make it yourself. And again, with these grocery stores feeling the pressure on all these other angles, it's like that's one of the ripcords you're going to pull in order to make sure that you can continue to remain competitive and profitable. And so it's one of those things where like it makes sense, but I agree with you that the sentiment change has been really interesting to watch, because it used to be that thing where if your mom bought the generic at the grocery store, you'd be disappointed. And now it's one of those things where it's like, I actually want that one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just been interesting to watch.
Yep. No, totally.
Well, so I have two consumer trends pieces. I'll do one, and then I'll kind of like kick it over to you for one, and then we'll piggyback. So the first one was ghost kitchens and virtual brands that were creator led specifically, in my opinion, totally flopped in 2025. And this went across the gamut. I work with a company out of New York that basically like fundraised on basically doing these creator-led brands, and they struggled a lot going into both 2024 and 2025, and 2023 too, to a point. And again, my being at least adjacent to one of these businesses, quality control was the big issue, and scale was the big issue. Both of those factors combined, you want to have a nationwide launch from the jump. And one of these brands, you take a Prime Energy, you take a Lunchly from Mr. Beast, and I think Logan Paul was involved in that too. Any of these brands, Travis Scott doing the menu collaboration with McDonald's, any of these again, creator-led virtual brands that, again, needs to have a big splashy, we're going to post about it on social media to millions of people, and every single person who sees this needs to have the ability to order this. This is a problem that I genuinely tried to help solve in one of these businesses. It is incredibly difficult, not just because you need to be prepared for that launch and the initial demand, but then also you want some of these brands to have longevity. You don't want them to just kind of like do the pop and then fizzle. You want them to have some sort of reasonable legs depending on the thing. Like the Travis Scott collab meal kind of has this expiration date on it because you want to hype people up and go and you experience it, and then you kind of like dissolve that because you want to, insert the next thing. But if you notice, what McDonald's has done for the holidays is they have done a Grinch meal. So it is not associated with a celebrity. It is not associated with an influencer. It is not partnering with a creator. It is this larger piece of IP in the Grinch. And so that is something that I think I totally did not see coming. I thought that some of these companies were going to be, obviously, as you're hearing some of the numbers that Mr. Beast charges for an ad on one of his videos, everybody was like, oh my God, it makes so much sense for him to launch Feastables because he's going to make way more money selling chocolate. He had to rework his whole chocolate formulation. The recipe had to change. Everything had to shift because he hit the market. Everybody gave feedback that it was like not differentiated enough, or the ingredients were whatever. And then all of a sudden he has to go back to the drawing board and totally like apologize and like say, please go try this again, because I think it's, and kudos to Mr. Beast for at least like having some sort of Mr. Beast burger, like we saw that whole, thing dissolve, not in 2025. I think that was, before this year, but I think it was something where I thought it was going to be something that was going to be a genuine competitor to, like a McDonald's. Like the next fast food franchise is going to be built from one of these creators. And all of these problems that so many of these operators deal with, it's like they didn't surround themselves with the right people. You know what I mean? And that is like giving myself a little bit of a shade here. It was like I was a minority, involvement person. And it was like these businesses are not easy to spin up. They are not easy to operate. They're not easy to manage. And so it's like when quality starts to slip, and that is something that like I can't be in 40 different locations across the US. And so all of this is like I'm giving myself a little bit of like from the trenches, so from the arena, so to speak, negative point here. It's like, it's not to say it won't take off in the future or that there's not an opportunity for something like this, because we might see this totally have just happened at the wrong time. And the actual unlock for one of these partnerships to go well is going to be autonomous robots in these restaurants. Those are going to be primo for creators because you can guarantee quality. You can have the portioning be just right. You can have the seasoning and the execution of the Maillard reaction on the thing be exactly how you want it, instead of it being this thing that is a secondary thing for a already existing restaurant to execute on, or it is this like pop-up style infrastructure where, you're literally just going to go into a old warehouse space and quote unquote make a restaurant, call it a ghost kitchen, and open it up for, like dozens and dozens of delivery orders with people who are not, maybe necessarily trained the best. And so all of this is just, again, it sucks for me to like take that L, but it is something that I am, I'm going to own up to it on the show here, because it's like, it's something that I just want people to be aware of. And I just think it's, did not see it coming. So yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. An interesting one. This is from Restaurant Business Online. They said that Yum Brands, these are the parent company of Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, etc. They created their own food trends report, which is interesting. So basically, they went and said that this is the me economy, and so I found this consumer trend really interesting. You see these brands looking at broader consumer trends, and I think they are actually really good data points on where consumers are going. And so for me, they say that they saw that the consumers seek meals that reflect their individual tastes. Solo orders are up from 31% in 2021 to 47% in 2025. That's solo restaurant orders, a jump of 52%. Over half overall. Over half of these occasions are what Yum calls premium moments, falling in the $10 to $30 range and over-indexing on treats like snacks and beverages. Personal style pizzas are outperforming with Gen Z and millennials, and 24% of solo diners eat to satisfy a craving. They say that the need to personalize doesn't stop with singles. 31% want something to customize when eating as a duo. But beyond that, just this idea that solo diners want stuff tailored to them. And if they're going to have that it's not as much as like tailoring each menu item, like not a Chipotle, but it's like tailoring their like overall dining experience. The one thing I also saw die off, and Justin, you let me know if this is wrong. Maybe a couple of things, but the biggest two big trends that like seem to have left is this idea of like nuclear spicy food. I was going through today, I just don't see that as much. The one chip challenge, hot ones, and like hot ones is still popular, but you don't see these massively spicy foods anymore. And it's that was interesting to see go. So I didn't see that as much this year. And I think the biggest thing I also just didn't see as much was you you didn't see as many, like, in my opinion, LTOs that went as crazy. It didn't feel like an LTO, like when I say LTO, limited time offering, a lot of big brands have had a lot of great LTO offerings. The Shamrock Shake, Starbucks,
McRib.
McRib, all that. I feel like this year was kind of light on that, and I was kind of surprised. And I think it's twofold on people needed to be in a routine in their spending, but also this idea that brands didn't see the value add when people were struggling too much. And so I think I could see in 2026 a much simpler menu offering from a lot of different operators. But just any thoughts on, let's recap, the idea of solo diners wanting more, nuclear spicy food out being out happily, sadly Birria being out, and then also like LTO just seeming to be down.
Well, I'll caveat this with the fact that I'm not going to share the name of the restaurant because I don't want this to be something that guests are asking for at this place. But it is a friend's place that my wife and I like to go to, and they, thankfully, because we are friends of the chef, they have offered to do something for us because they know that when we go, we literally like to order the entire menu. They have offered to do certain dishes as half portions for us because they're like, if we give you every single dish, it is going to be way too much food for you guys because everything is formatted in a way where like the costs need to be what they are. Certain dishes are, like inherently more filling or protein heavy or vegetable focused. And so my wife and I love the fact that we can order in this way at this particular restaurant. And I think to that point, if you're going as a solo diner to a place where it is like the stereotypical server goes to the table and says, we recommend you order X number of dishes and everything's meant to be shared. And you're like, it's literally just me. That creates this kind of conundrum where you're kind of like, okay, well, I can only order 3 things or I can only order 4 things. And then it turns into this problem of now you have decision fatigue. Now you're kind of like looking at other tables saying, shucks, I should have ordered that. And you don't have the opportunity to kind of like get the full gamut and experience the place in the way that the chef might want you to experience. And so then you as a solo diner, you might be a little bit, upset and your experience wasn't maybe up to snuff with what you were maybe expecting going to this place that you were maybe hyped for. The other thing is I did a guest blog post for a friend who owns a media company, and he sometimes asks me to kind of like contribute on certain food pieces that he puts out. And it was on the rise of dill pickle being something that was like, again, just having a large proliferation in the market. And maybe we'll link it in the description if people want to go ahead and read it. It was just like a quick little quote that I provided. But what I said in that writing was we saw the rise of the nuclear spicy. I didn't use that specific language, but the kind of like crazy spice levels getting to be something that, again, kind of fell out of fashion. And so I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that I certainly noticed it too. And you're seeing it replaced with these things that are either more culturally bringing people into the fold in a way that it is like, I haven't had this, this particular food item prepared with this seasoning. Or you're seeing something that is almost culturally beloved that is still punchy, still differentiated, still something that can be something like an LTO for a business, but you're seeing it brought to the fold in something like a dill pickle. I think you can maybe see some other, like Nashville hot maybe is another kind of like version.
We've talked about this off camera, and this is like one of the off camera conversations Justin and Ray has is like, we pontificated on this idea that like people are kind of tired of the shock food content or the shock food experience. Like no one wants to be shocked when they're eating food. You might want to be surprised and delighted, try something new, have a new experience, but no one wants to like have their mouth burned off or just like be scared or be shocked. Like that's kind of out. And so I think that a lot of it is attributed to that. Now, it doesn't mean like spicy food is down. There's a lot of different products. There's a lot of different success with spicy food. This idea of like, you're going about your face off or you're going to watch someone about their face off. Like it still has its audience, but it's just the shock food thing is like dead, I think, in 2025.
I don't know, man. I saw a gift guide come out this year, and it was like some guy who was talking about how to buy gifts for the man in your life or whatever. And one line of it was literally something like, please do not buy us another hot sauce. And it was, I just thought that was so funny because it is this like with, hot ones being, the most popular thing in the world and everybody getting so hyped on, just do one dab of it on whatever it is that you're doing. And it's going to be genuinely painful I think everybody just has these things sit on their shelves after you have that one, funny moment with your friends. And then it's like, okay, that again, talking about the whole experience, it's like, I'm not going to come back again. You're like, I'm sorry, you got your big revenue spike for, the moment that you went viral, but that's not a sustainable business that you can actually have people reorder on. And so that was very telling.
Justin, I have one more little trends piece for you, and I know you had something cool that I wanted to talk with you on. So this came from the New York Times. It's actually published back in September, and I wanted to save this for the kind of this episode. And there's a whole thing. It's our staff's restaurants of the year plus takes and trends from 2025, and there's a lot of good things they share. But I always like to see like what would you like to see less of, and there's a couple of different things that I think is kind of just showing if like leaders of food criticism in the New York Times are saying it that it's probably going to catch on trend later. And so I'm just going to go through some of these and maybe not all of them, but just some of them caught my attention and you like, obviously like comment when needed, but menus that don't tell you anything about the food and restaurants carved into new buildings as afterthoughts. This is by Brett Anderson. Brian Gallagher says meal pacing dictated solely by the kitchen rather than diners. Appetizers dropping before wine is poured. Main courses coming before appetizers are finished. And the table becoming a chaos of plates and welcome in. And so I think those two like kind of pair up, but like, what are your thoughts on this idea of like we should kind of stop this inability to like perform where like the kitchen isn't dictating how it's going?
I love this idea because to the unreasonable hospitality point, I sometimes love this idea of like going back to first principles and thinking about this is really helpful for chefs to experience is like go eat at the restaurant as a guest. There's a friend of the channel, William Bradley, a chef at Addison in Southern California. He posts on his Instagram story almost at least once a quarter, him sitting as a guest at his 3 Michelin star restaurant. And he talks about this idea of like experiencing it from that perspective totally allows him to see the kinks, get the gist of the dining room, point out individual problems. Will Guidara did this at 11 Madison Park. And seeing where those awkward moments are. When do you have to wait? Where are the operational inefficiencies? Where is it like, oh, well, we actually have an opportunity here before we drop this menu or before we get the drink order in or before we serve XYZ thing to actually like do those surprise and delight moments that Ray, you were talking about or alluding to. And it's kind of like, why does it have to be in this way? Is, like maybe it makes sense in XYZ person's business, but for the way that you guys do things, you could do it totally differently and actually be this thing that, again, people are like way stoked on because it's like, oh my goodness, we didn't have to wait 20 minutes before getting our first XYZ thing. And then that can make it so that like you can take on more, you can be busier and be confident in that when you are busy, guests are still having a good experience instead of what a lot of us have experienced, which is the opposite. When you get busy, guests are getting frustrated, which like then starts the negative flywheel spiral into chaos.
I have 3 quick ones.
Yeah.
Kim Severson says she wants to see well thought out and balanced green salads that aren't a sort of afterthought or cost center, which is cool. I want your response on these two. So Priya Krishna says she wants to see breakfast spots, not bakeries, with personality and restaurants showcasing the cuisines of West Africa, less intense air conditioning and more counter service. What struck me, I mean, West African food is very underrepresented in the American dining scene. I think that's something that is very much poised. I think it could be successful, and it needs to happen in the food industry. But breakfast spots with personality. Your thoughts on this?
I think that that's like maybe the one that is like those are the places that have the lines. You know what I mean? Like there's the breakfast places that do like the same old same old. You can just get a butter croissant, or you go and you get your eggs Benedict, or you go and get your like stack of pancakes with hash browns and eggs and bacon. And it's like those places maybe don't have the huge line out the door. But I'm thinking of so many places here in Seattle, whether it's bagel places or donut shops or pastry spots that like do something really unique. And even after being open for ages and ages and ages, it's like they still have a line out the door. And that I think is just a testament to the fact that like breakfast places are almost this beautiful blank canvas for a personality to enter the fold. And so maybe I push back on that a little bit, like define personality maybe is like
I
where
think
my
Girl
head
on the
goes.
Go in Chicago is the idea of like if I saw a breakfast place with personality, like that would be one I'd go to and be like, that's an awesome place to get breakfast.
Yeah, and to me that's maybe a little bit more on like the brand and like the room is really, really cool. And there's something there that is maybe a little bit more on it. I mean, like I again, maybe a little bit like that's my bias is that like I'm going to naturally seek out the places that are a little bit more interesting and off the beaten path. And so maybe there's something there that I just maybe not disagree with, but I don't know.
And then Tehal Rao shared this last one. I forget which restaurant we were talking about on the podcast where it was like maybe some restaurants aren't meant to be scaled. I don't know if it was linear, maybe it was EMP. But they go on to say that more investment in restaurants that take risks and believe in their own point of view, more restaurants that aren't built to be replicated or scaled, more excellent vegetable cookery, more room for walk-ins, more trust in diners. So this idea of more investment in restaurants that take risks, and in the same breath, more restaurants that aren't built to be replicated or scaled. We've talked about this, and you've shared how like some restaurants aren't meant to like be a Cava or a Chipotle. Um, your thoughts on this in an era where it's like it seems the only key indicator for success for a restaurant is to be able to replicate it and do it everywhere else.
Brought this up at the beginning of the show for a reason, which was this idea of restaurants being painted with too broad of a brush. And so this, to me, is an example, and sometimes we fall victim to this too in the show because we have to kind of make it an interesting point here, which is you can't take an idea that works at a place like Alinea and scale it to every single other restaurant business or whatever. And the same thing that's going to work at a trendy bakery or a cool diner concept or a cocktail bar is not going to work at Alinea. And I think like that's okay. You can have the business that you want to have. And so some of this stuff you as an operator need to take with a grain of salt and make sure that it's going to make sense for you. But I think that's why I talk about the first principles idea, where you can kind of come back to what do we need? What are our problems? Not getting shiny object syndrome, not getting distracted, making sure that you have clear goals for where your business needs to go. And then that's the thing that you deploy. Just something that I've been also kind of thinking about and making sure that we are making clear here, because you can read a piece that and you can say something, and like that's, again, not to get on a soapbox here, but that's my criticism of the people who push back to the unreasonable hospitality philosophy thing. Because Will Goddard wrote it about 11 Madison Park, and he has success in high-end hotels or boutique, shopping centers or, like high-end marketing firms when they have the ability to kind of go above and beyond, do the things that don't scale to their clients or their customers. And then the person who owns the, dumpling shop is looking and saying, I can't do unreasonable hospitality stuff here. It doesn't work for me. And so then it's kind of like, is the advice bad, or is it a problem of just taking the advice and not actually digesting it in a way that can actually benefit your business? All of this stuff that's why the nuance matters. That's why we try to get into some of this stuff here. Because again, I think when you paint with too broad of a brush, you piss people off. And then, people look at that and they totally discredit it, or they decide to badmouth it or demean you when like it's just incorrect. You know what I mean? Like it's just wrong place, wrong time.
Yep.
Cool. So I have a really, it's interesting because it came across my feed, and again, it kind of builds on some of the themes that we've been talking about here. It's a person named Andrew Young on Twitter, and he posted on X. I still call it Twitter. I think you do too, Ray. But he posted, I'll read it because it's kind of, the context matters here. So the post reads, there's a new role every startup is desperate to fill, head of IRL. And they're paying $150,000 to $250,000 a year for the right person. And I'll give some context here, but this dovetails off of us covering chef salaries getting up to $100,000. This gets into in-person experiences in this age of technology and people being sick of social media being something that like people are craving. I think it's going to go only up in 2026. And so I'll go back to Andrew's tweet here. Every startup is looking for someone to host events and build critical relationships with the stakeholders around the company, VCs, talent, and customers. Why the sudden surge? Because the digital playbook is breaking. Paid acquisition costs are through the roof. Social platforms are saturated with AI slop, something Ray and I have talked about on the show a lot, in the food side, maybe not on the content side. But then back to the tweet, in-person as a channel is becoming more valuable than ever. We have also talked about this idea of bigger brands, a Tiffany & Co. launching a collaboration with Natsuke Et, I think is her name. And she is the chef who is in Japan, in Tokyo, at the flagship retail location of Tiffany, opening a cafe concept that is going to be like incredibly elaborate. Back to the tweet. I wouldn't be surprised if more startups start building out an events and media platform as a core part of their customer acquisition and brand marketing strategy. Pausing here to add a little bit of thoughts here. Don't you think they're going to need someone to head up the culinary side of that? Don't you think they're going to make sure that the events go well, and your catering experience and being able to bring people together and make sure that an event goes well is going to be valuable to one of these companies? I digress. Back to the tweet. If you love people, physical experiences, and like to create content, you are in a great place right now. And then he literally shares examples and screenshots. Antimetal is hiring a GTM associate to host dinners. Base 10 is hiring a natural connector to build community. And Basic Capital is hiring an IRL growth manager to produce events. The startups that figure out the IRL engine will have a massive distribution advantage, end quote. And so we'll link the tweet in the show notes if you want to take a look at it. There's obviously some pushback in the comments, but I genuinely think that there is this like, if you are going to compare running Facebook ads or going to an event where you can meet the people who are exactly your target market and they're going to get referred by some other person, and you have the opportunity to build loyalty to get that person to come to the next event because your food was like better than a restaurant because you hired a ex-restaurant person to come and do the food at your events. It's like, tell me that's not going to win. You know what I mean? Like there's something there that I think is like, the machines are going to do their thing, but us humans still crave the things that we've craved for thousands of years. And so all of these companies like figuring this stuff out. I personally went on a rant, and I think I did a newsletter article on this, that when NFTs were becoming a huge thing, I said there's a huge opportunity for chefs to be able to offer something in the market to these platforms. I don't know what you would call an NFT, like these communities who are building audiences, and they need to satisfy the needs that this audience has to engage in person. It is like chefs make so much sense to be inserted there. NFTs kind of like fell by the wayside, but now we're seeing like some of these companies that are doing all sorts of other things insert the industry. Do you know what I mean? Like they're hiring for these roles. And I think like if somebody is already getting paid $250,000 to produce the event, that is the company saying, we have budget here. We are allocating resources here. We are deciding that we're going to prioritize this and invest in this. And we care about this because it genuinely drives business outcomes for us. And then you as the chef don't have to worry about running your own, catering company or being a private chef. You can literally get paid by one of these large, either tech companies or a startup that is reasonably well-funded to do what you do best and just integrate seamlessly. And so all of this stuff is just very, very interesting to me as we think about opportunities for people in the industry. And so if you're a chef who has managed to land one of these roles, please, please, please let us know, because it's something that I'm going to keep an eye on going into the next year.
Cool. I'll say that to end this, we've covered a lot. This is an hour and 20 minutes of recording. Obviously, it'll get edited down. I think the biggest thing that I want to just share with anyone watching this podcast, the food industry podcast, is being like, the reason we do this show is to keep you all informed on these trends so that there's no surprises. And we report on things super early. Justin and I have seen, and just in our data, we will report on stories as they're happening or when they're happening. And then like 2 to 3 weeks later, we'll see it increase in the video popping up or data popping up. And we do that because we think it's super important that, going into 2026, you all are very informed and you all know what's going on. And this isn't just going to end with some cheesy subscribe to the channel, although it does help us. But it's more so just like, I truly think what this year showed is that being aware and understanding the macroeconomics and the macro dynamics of not just restaurants, but the food industry as a whole is not only just like a nice to have, but is now vital because everything is blending into a consumer that's going to be spending less in different places, but more overall due to the nature of pricing and whatnot. So being aware of that is key. Any thoughts on that, Justin?
Yeah, we decided we were going to do this type of show in this format with this as the goal. And in the early days, it was kind of like a amalgamation of the things that you and I kind of like briefly touched on in the shows that we both did respectively, separate of one another. And it's just been awesome to like see the growth in the listenership and the comments that you folks send and the conversations that we're able to get into with you folks. Like, we have one of the coolest audiences on the internet, in my opinion. And again, to not end on that cheesy note, because yes, like and subscribe and share the episodes and leave us a review, but just to also share that this is not just like a shameless self-promotion thing. Friend of the channel, they've sponsored some stuff throughout the year. This is not a sponsored segment of the show. It's just something that I wanted to more or less like highlight some other people who have gotten some awards and shout outs. So 7 Chefs actually came out with something called the Restaurant Innovators of 2025 list. And it's kind of like a roundup, just like showcasing people across a couple different categories. So they have the Ops Innovator, the Unsung Hero, the Tip Top Service Star, and the one that I was awarded with, and so thank you to 7 Chefs, the Industry Voice. And so that is something that we'll link in the description so that you can see some of the other people who are just getting highlighted and showcased across, like these different categories. There's like 4 or 5 more. And so just 7 Chefs has been great to work with. I know that so many of you folks use it in your business. And so I just wanted to include it, one, to just like say thank you. Like, you folks watching is one of the reasons that we can get the kudos in this way. And I'm stoked to see technology get better, restaurants get smarter, people be more kind of like conscious of businesses. Obviously, there's the downsides, and we cover those on this show. But I think it is something that I'm increasingly aware of, and it's cool to kind of get some acknowledgement for the work that we're doing here. And so, again, I didn't bring that up on the beginning of the show because it's not something where like it feels a little weird, like they sponsor the stuff and then they're gonna, like highlight us. It's not something where I was, we don't get paid, to do any of this stuff, but it is something that is just kind of interesting. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to share it as like a cool moment. I'm also not very good at giving myself pats on the back sometimes, and so this is me attempting to do that in maybe not the best way.
Well, you definitely deserve it. Congrats. And thank you also just to the people listening. This has been I mean, Justin and I decided to do this year. We've seen tremendous growth already. We have a lot, hopefully more to be, a lot more growth to come and a lot more cool content, but it's been cool to kind of find our groove, and we've appreciated all of you just enjoying the content. So,
And make sure you're subscribed because we're gonna next week be putting out an episode on predictions, and maybe if it's not next week, it's gonna be the week after.
2
But we
weeks,
are
2
gonna
weeks,
talk
yeah.
about we're really gonna like put our foot down, draw a line in the sand, plant a flag, and say this is what we're thinking about. And we will be able to look back at the end of 2026 if this whole thing is still going and see if we were right or wrong, or you folks can flame us in the comments.
We're not going to play it safe. I've committed, and I haven't told you this yet, but I've committed to us having like our predictions that are like, we feel pretty good on, and then our moonshot. Like,
Okay.
this is like what I am predicting, and it's just like my gut, and obviously the data I've collected, and those can be the ones we can kind of maybe play back and say right or wrong on. So
So stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that episode, and we'll see you folks in the next one.